Have you ever taken an Am I Gay test? Asking, because I have, many times. I'm constantly insecure about my identity, and sometimes the absurdity of taking the test makes me laugh and reaffirms me. I'm definitely queer, but I feel like I'm doing it wrong. I've always been this way, but it became a worsening anxiety after I started to take on more leadership roles related to being queer. I'm always asking myself if I'm queer enough to do the job, trying to find someone else who I deem more qualified than me. I think that's all a learned insecurity. Somewhere along the way, I accepted that I was queer, but I also started believing that there is levels of adequacy to it. That doesn't make sense though. I mean, I have the most pronouns and I've kissed a lot of different identities, so I'm pretty gay. Except being gay doesn't make me a radical queer. Being gay is like a hobby I have, but being queer is the lens that I use to understand the world. However, I do think that me being transgender is actually a good starting point for understanding my insecurity. Being trans is actually the first part of myself that I ever accepted. Before I could read, I knew I wasn't a boy. I sensed there was something off, and that feeling of off only grew the more that being a boy was supposed to influence my identity. The nuances of it are always shifting, but I've practically always been aware that I'm not cis, even when I didn't know how to say it. So that already alienated me. I spent years trying to escape a box. When I finally escaped it, it kinda sucked. I came out as gender fluid, and I thought that nobody took it seriously, so I switched to being a trans girl so that people would perceive me as a woman. Then all felt forced, so I became gender fluid again. One time someone asked me if it's all a state of resignation, like if I use any pronouns to shield myself against the pain of misgendering. That made it all click for me. When I forced myself to be a trans girl, that was unqueer of me. If the whole point of being queer is a rejection of norms, me watering myself down from being gender fluid to more palatable identity was the opposite of that. I felt frustrated that people didn't get me. Instead of trying to work on that, I took the easier road and made myself into a walking stereotype of femininity in the hopes that people would view me as a woman. When you're first coming out, you usually try a bunch of labels and it can take years to come into yourself. So that isn't a critique of swapping labels, but instead why I did it. I was trying to appease other people by calling myself something that I consciously knew I wasn't. I tried to gaslight myself into making it work, rejecting any hint of masculinity. Except that's dumb. Even a woman has some masculine in them. My pursuit to be seen as a woman led to me reinforcing all of the gender norms around women. It doesn't help that my go-to resource for my identity was the internet. The cool thing about the internet is that because it's so open, trans people can thrive on it. Traditional media outlets tend to not favor trans people, and being able to search up information on being trans that is written by actual trans people is a blessing. Especially with social media platforms, you can take in a wider array of experiences that don't need to be filtered for the sake of profitability or finding an audience. However, there is a major negative to this. Social media is a bubble. In my case, that bubble led to me having everything filtered through white, middle-class American perspectives. These perspectives are not bad, but if it's all you see, you're not well-rounded. There's a major risk of tunnel vision, and that's what happened to me. I was primarily getting my information on being trans from places like Reddit and Twitter for a period of time. Where the medical system failed me, social media stepped in, which isn't exactly a positive. Medical systems gave me years-long waits, but social media often encouraged the worst thoughts about myself. I ended up getting sucked into a version of being trans that isn't true to myself. A major portion of the version of trans identity I was sold on was rooted in nothing. It was about becoming a girl, but not much else. It cheered for equality, but that equality was just including us in the existing systems. Fundamentally, trans people challenge the currently existing systems of society, which is why fascist movements always target us. However, the version of being trans I got sold on was what social media encourages, being a girl, and how it's fun. The beauty standards for it were based on blending into a white, middle-class girl. It was all about passing for a woman in the current system, rather than challenging it. I don't blame people for wanting to pass, because so much of the world hates us and it's much safer to blend in. In a way, it's a privilege to be able to consider the idea of not passing. I'm worried about the concept of passing being embedded into transgender culture, because that feels like a level of shame, like we're supposed to contort our bodies to blend into what the most desirable cis people look like. It becomes a toxic cycle where we're low-key transvestigating ourselves, finding what makes us look not cis, and trying to smooth that over. It's one thing to want to be a girl, but sometimes social media platforms such as Reddit push an unhealthy level of hyper-femininity and flattening of identity for the sake of being perceived as a girl. It feels a little infantilizing. I remember trying to understand egg memes and such, but being a bit discomforted because it felt like I was trying to make being trans femme into an unrealistic version of being a girl. Plus, passing is a bit of a problematic metric because it's based on whiteness and in a way sexism. The main version of passing I've seen is about living up to a societal standard of woman, but it feels coded for looking like the stereotype of a white middle-class woman, or alternatively, white models. I think a lot of us grow up seeing that be presented as what a woman is, and when we try to become a woman, we then try to live up to that unrealistic standard. In an attempt to feel good, we do occasionally forget to check some of our seemingly invisible toxic baggage at the door. When you search up beauty tips for trans people, they are often rooted in nearly entirely that exact image I'm describing. It's not problematic if your ideal image of yourself looks like what I'm describing, but it is problematic if that becomes a communal standard. Trans culture crosses over a lot with black ballroom and alt cultures, so there's plenty of underground trans cultures that do fall outside what I'm describing. However, living up to white culture's versions of beauty becoming conflated with passing as a trans person is a real problem that we need to work on. Like whenever I see people talk about using foundation, it feels like they focus on only white people. Also, some of the terminology in general is a bit concerning. There's a focus on face shapes, lip fullness, and body fat percentages. While researching for this paragraph, I even saw the phrase realistically female, with someone trying to describe how they wanted to appear. What is the term realistically female, if not, even if unintentional, veiled language that pushes toxic standards of how women are supposed to look? When I hear this type of language, it reminds me of one of the other main contributors to women's beauty standards: eating disorders. Makeup, clothing, and other forms of appearance are typically rooted in what is societally deemed to be good, which is already rooted in various forms of excluding groups of people. When we start adding on top things like body fat percentage, it's pretty much just an eating disorder. We could talk about body fat distribution in male versus female bodies, but how many people are getting advice on that from a doctor or reading medical papers, compared to just hearing it on Reddit? A lot of transitioning is rooted in lived experience, but sometimes people don't unpack how many factors go into that experience. Yes, your transition was affected by things like your food intake, but health conditions you have or traits passed down for your family may also affect it. It's rarely ill-intentioned and often starts out as someone just trying to share what worked for them. When you get into people providing medical advice and transitioning, it gets a bit murky because the medical industry is not entirely to be trusted, and a large portion of doctors aren't knowledgeable about trans people, but there is a deep danger in unverified information on social media being taken as gospel. Some of the advice I've seen borders on dangerous, such as mass-consuming high-fat foods such as pizza just to gain fat that will be redistributed, or restricting certain nutrient intakes to lower T. That's dangerous, but when it gets uploaded online, it gets spread around to more people, legitimizing it. The internet is a tool, and if we wield it properly, it works wonders, but that means being willing to assess how we're using it. Social media platforms profit off us being insecure. A lot of us now live in a post-social media world, which means we're growing up with all the ways that social media curates racism, eating disorders, and much more. We need to be willing to check ourselves and our biases, because so many people I've met believe that due to them being queer, they're absolved of having issues such as racism. That's not true in the slightest. You can be queer and still host a set of biases. I find this lack of unlearning biases creates conservative opinions that use seemingly progressive language. People often pick up pieces of progressive language as they assimilate into the queer community, but they're not learning the history behind certain beliefs or why they matter. So they overly adhere to a few things such as men are the dominant group in society, but don't apply a critical lens to it and consider how masculine-leaning non-binary people or trans men present and are oppressed. It leads to language that overly conflates non-binary people and women, which defeats the purpose of the non-binary label. I'm pretty partial to the German term Flinte, which I learned about recently. Flinte covers women, lesbians, intersex people, non-binary, trans, and agender. I feel like it covers all the non-cis categories without feeling like it's woman and women light only, or coded language for anyone that the organizers deem to be a woman. As a gender fluid person, the policing around no men events does feel kinda gross. What is a man? Is it someone dressed masculinely? That could be a trans man who does suffer from patriarchy, a trans femme super early in their transition, or so many other identities. I've had experiences where it feels like I get stares for being at a woman and non-binaries event because I'm not dressed up femininely enough to pass for what they wanted. That level of self-policing is just excessive and leads to a lot of bad assumptions about people. Something like Flint is significantly better because it leaves the door open for people to be many things. It doesn't break gender to just a binary of cis men and not cis men. Especially because I find that much of the deeper reasoning for people to disinclude cis men is flimsy. As someone who identifies with being a woman, I am sympathetic to wanting to have women-only spaces. I don't think it's necessarily bad to have these spaces. However, often the sentiment becomes about painting cis men as the enemy, and that's not useful either. Yes, plenty of the violence against queer people has originated from cis men, but by drawing a hard line of no men, you disinclude those people who are on the edge of masculinity, or people who might be questioning and want to try existing in a space like that. Especially with the memes about the straight boyfriend of bi women, or performative bisexual men. I find this behavior to be mean-spirited and a grass floating of men. Someone can be very queer, oppressed, and present in a way that makes them look like a cis man. painting men as the bad ones, and trying to exclude anyone who is masculine from queer spaces doesn't do anything for our movement, and if anything, just fractures it. When we try too hard to create new separate spaces and claim things exclusively for a certain identity, we risk reinventing the same barriers that divided us. It's okay to have spaces exclusive to certain identities. These affinities create unique, important bonds. But when we get to the point of men don't belong at Chapel Roan concerts, or men need to dress more fruity for Pride, we're just infighting. There is no inherent reason to do that. Similar to the struggle of getting weird looks for not being feminine enough, I also receive flack for being not bisexual enough. Lately I've been reassessing whether or not I'm bisexual, but if I openly identify as bisexual, that makes me bisexual. I see people treat bisexuality like it needs to be an even ratio of liking men and women, but it really doesn't need to be. I use bisexual because I find that my thoughts on gender and attraction are too complicated for me to feel like I'm anything except bi. I've considered that I may be a lesbian, but I also don't feel there. I get a lot of poking about the fact that I don't like men a lot, but I feel like there's also nuances to that. And also I shouldn't have to declare whether I like a man just to prove that I'm bisexual. Like, what do I gain from posing as bisexual? It's one thing to make a joke of, man, Kim, you like pretty much only women, you might be a lesbian. But at some point, if you're overly questioning my bisexuality, I question what the point of that is. All of these different levels of queer self-policing made me hate myself. When we're caught in all these discourses, you lose sight of the fact that it's your identity. It feels like I have to show people my queer card and prove that I'm super queer, because I fit into nearly all of these boxes. If I'm not feminine enough, I'll have to hear comments about passing or getting asked about voice training. If I haven't declared that I liked a man recently, I apparently lose my right to be bisexual. For the first few years of being out, I was smoothing myself out, finding the pieces that didn't line up with other people's expectations of my labels, and killing them. At that point I'm transitioning, but it's all aesthetic and not ideological. That's the unqueer piece. I wanted to appease people that wouldn't ever let me back. My whole life, I've been taught about a version of the world, particularly the US, that's never accepted trans people. We are constantly fighting for crumbs. We're tripping over ourselves, putting down other trans people as weird or overly radical for a chance at being acknowledged as human. However, these systems aren't built to accommodate us, and it's going to be decades of fighting to reform them. On top of that, while the internet helped me come to terms with the base of my identity, it also made me feel constantly judged and under pressure. When your identity becomes online discourse, you lose sight of the pieces that matter. So, I needed to learn to love myself. How did I do that though? Where does the unlearning of a lifetime of shame start? Historically, the internet has done a lot of positive things for trans people. Digital spaces give you room to experiment with your identity without people at school or work finding out. You can drop your physical appearance and become whatever you want through digital arts and only interact in text chats. For my teenage years, I did exactly that. Discord chats, pic crews, and girl character profile pics. I threw stars around my name to make it feel more cutesy. I put pronouns in my bio, but also a bunch of other pieces of my queer identity. It allowed me to hyper-cultivate how people perceive me. After a while, that becomes unhealthy. We're not supposed to have complete control over how people perceive us, and I became too hyper-conscious. I got so caught up in protecting myself from transphobia that I forgot to just enjoy being trans. If I was going to love myself, I needed to learn to enjoy myself. However, the internet is too toxic for that, so I need to step out into the physical world. I'm very lucky that I go to college in an area that's extremely trans-friendly compared to the rest of America. The area I lived in before is still safer than the majority of places, but I never felt comfortable being out. I remember seeing people get called slurs in the hallway or get pushed for being queer, so college felt like a new chance for me to discover my identity. My first month of college, I got to march in a pride parade, and it changed everything. Pride didn't do anything for me before, because I never got to participate in it. So, standing there in a sea of gay people, it made me feel comfortable in myself. It's a moment of solidarity where you remember that you're not alone. For the first time, I also wore gender fluid and pansexual flags. People would point at my flags and theirs, and we briefly bond over a shared experience. It all felt good. I'd spent 2 years being out online, and in that time, I never really came out in person except to a small select few people. So for a while, it felt like my digital and physical identities diverged so hard. Going to Pride for the first time was like coming back into my own body. I still wasn't on HRT and my fashion sense was a little whack, but I started believing that things could work out for me. People were calling me Kim, and the world acknowledged that I was trans. In that moment, I felt queer, but in a way where I finally got the message. Being queer is a shared experience. In real time, I saw the norms that were rejected. It wasn't just about rejecting gender and sexuality norms, but also rejecting the idea that we're better off alone or that we're supposed to do anything but love each other. None of the discourse that I had to deal with over the past few years mattered at Pride. Nobody was sitting there transvestigating me, or if they were, I didn't notice. Nobody was judging the nuances of my gender fluidity, if I was more masculine or feminine aligned. That's because none of that discourse actually matters. We're supposed to be messy, and discourse about how bi are you, or why is a cishet man at Pride is meaningless. It's all a distraction from building solidarity with each other. The internet made me worried that if I wasn't feminine enough, I wouldn't be welcomed at Pride. Like, if I wasn't fitting into the specific popular stereotype of a trans girl, I'd get seen as something else and nobody would take me seriously. Yet, people did clock me for what I wanted to be perceived as, even though my outfit was some hot ass. I mean, yikes, bro. So, things carried on merrily. I made new trans friends, upped my fashion, gained confidence, started HRT, and I even started making videos again. Everything was going well and it felt like they could only get better. I started to have a career and one of my videos blew up. I grew into my body and also my identity got rounded out. I was becoming more confident in my politics and as a result, a little more radical. However, by the end of 2024, everything crashed. It all started after uploading my video and I saw the TV glow because the video did well. That sounds contradictory. I mean, why would a video doing well make me quit? Well, it's mainly because it made me self-conscious. People were talking about how I worded things in the way that they needed, but I felt dumb. I started wondering if I was qualified to be writing if random people are going to take something from it. So, I quit uploading. Then, Trump was re-elected a few weeks later. I remember being so confident that he'd lose until around mid-October. You could feel a sizable shift in how people were discussing the election, and I kept seeing so many fumbles. It began to seem more likely that we could lose. I kept trying to appear confident whenever anyone asked me about it. On election night, I sat in the call with my friends, and I had to watch us lose in real time. I tried to pretend that we could still win, but I knew we lost. When it was officially wrapped, I remember going outside, crying, and wondering where we went wrong. The road ahead felt long, and I remember spending November and December trying to focus on school and not think about it. Then, over winter break, I went to parties hoping to distract myself a little bit longer. All I did was make it worse, and I started having severe anxiety. By mid-February, I was exhausted and off HRT. It all felt like a new low. Every week was a new attack on trans people from the Trump administration, and it felt like the world was rolling over and letting it happen. It felt like it'd never end, and like tomorrow we could just wake up and lose it all. Sitting there for a few months at what felt like the end of my world, I had to question, why am I trans? If I'm going to keep being outwardly trans at a time where the government wants to erase trans people, what's the point? What do I want from the world? If I'm going to be writing and organizing, what am I trying to make happen? Not just like specific policies, but what's the dream? I didn't have an answer for any of those questions. It made me realize that for all my identity discovery, I never rooted myself in anything. I built new things and there was never a deep foundation to build them on. I wasn't knowledgeable about the history of trans people, and I didn't feel a deep connection to my home state. If I didn't find my roots, how could I build anything on top of them? I had literal roots, like who I was related to, where I lived, and things that happened to me, but I didn't have the why for anything I was doing. I was just doing it because it felt right, which can only get you so far. So, I need to figure out, what type of queer do I want to be? Earlier I talked about my complicated relationship with being trans where I live. I wouldn't say that where I live is the worst for trans people, but I remember growing up and witnessing a lot of transphobia. After I first left, it started getting better and now it's not as bad. However, that period of growing up next to transphobia meant that I wasn't ever confident. I remember losing friends from transphobia and being ostracized. The only place I ever felt like myself was when I got away from it, especially when I'd go to PAX East in Boston with my friend every year. So, I realized that I needed to start there. I needed to return to Boston, but not just walking around it. I wanted to stand there and experience something like that first Pride magic, but with my new context of the world. So I went to Boston Pride, and I experienced that old sense of community and liberation, but this time I felt uncertain. I had spent the last 6 months feeling a constant sense of sadness, from how it felt like we were being trampled with little resistance from our allies. Standing there, I saw a large mass of people, but I wasn't sure if it was enough. I saw the signs of companies, and I questioned if they'd actually do anything for us. Yet, I walked away confident. I saw all those things I just listed, but I also saw local orgs who put in the work, queers in love, allies coming out to support their loved ones, and most importantly, people younger than me having the courage to step out and be themselves. If someone younger than me who can't even vote can go step up for themselves, I need to get up. Before I was born, the world I existed in sounded unimaginable. We've seen a cultural slide against trans people again, but we've always gotten back up. In the 2010s, and even the 2020s, we've had so many victories. I get exhausted by how much we have left to do, but then I see something like trans youth being able to march in a parade and celebrate being themselves. I remember how much we've won. Armed with that optimism, I went and visited my friend in Chicago. I happened to align my visit with their Pride Fest. For the first time ever, I got to attend Pride while being confident in who I was. I walked around taking note of all that I saw. It was about liberation. That's the thing, right? We can't free trans people if we don't free Palestinians, fight for racial equity, secure abortion rights, house the unhoused, all of that. If one of us is oppressed, we're all still oppressed. Because our identity intersects with so many different things. We're not just trans, and that's where I went wrong in life. I thought I was just gay and trans, but my identity can't ever be boiled down to just those two pieces, even if I originally wanted that. On top of going to Pride events, I spent time reading a lot of queer nonfiction focused on our history and how we fought for the current rights we have. I also read about how other movements got their victories. I began to take joy in the everyday things, and I found new hobbies. There's no resistance if you don't believe in the idea of a brighter tomorrow. Staying there in Chicago, it's where it all came together for me. Talking about my identity in relation to everything going on in that moment made it clock. What I want is to push for a better version of our current movement. I had spent the last year seeing how existing support systems failed us, watching friends be further marginalized, and reminiscing on how I felt my own needs sidelined for the sake of respectability. Especially in the wake of 2024, people have been discussing how we need to further neuter ourselves to make gains, but I don't think that's true. An example of this that really upset me was a quote from Sarah McBride in June 2025, where I felt like she was throwing non-binary people under the bus.
Sort of the overplaying of the hand in some ways, that we, as a sort of coalition, went to Trans 201, Trans 301, when people were still at a very much Trans 101 stage 1.
It's one thing to argue there's a lot of nuances and misconceptions around transgender people, but it felt like that quote came from a very trans-medicalist perspective. It felt like it was being argued that before we can openly welcome non-binary people, we need to secure the baseline of trans rights first. Except, I don't personally find that to be true. I think you can focus on ways to make the messaging work for the average Joe who knows nothing about gender, and also simply just integrate it into our baseline messaging on things like economic stability or healthcare for everyone. The mainstream Dem movement failed us because they overcomplicated us to the general public, and the Republicans took advantage of that. Look at how someone like Mamdani talks about trans rights. He just simply defends them, doesn't make any concessions, and people just accept it. Obviously, New York City is a much more progressive place than the rest of the US, but I think a lot of candidates can learn from that style of messaging on trans people. Don't water down most of us to guarantee compassion for only a few. It's been nearly a year since this quote, but every time I still think about it, I still get pretty upset. If it came from any other member of Congress, it probably wouldn't have hit as hard. However, considering Sarah McBride is our first openly trans Congress member, and it was during Pride Month of one of the hardest years to be trans in America over the last decade, it hit me hard. It's not that I personally have ever looked up to Sarah McBride, or even the Democratic Party as a whole, but it's more so the idea of finally having someone similar to me in Congress, and hearing that person invalidate parts of my identity in one of our biggest times of need. It's been 10 years since the debate heated up with events such as the anti-trans bill in North Carolina, and it feels like the mainstream conversation has become deeply radicalized since then. We made progress, and then people thought that was too much progress, and it got erased. We need to rethink things, and nothing scares me more than seeing our leaders fail to meet the moment. Those emotions hit me because staring out in that crowd at Chicago 2 weeks after that quote dropped reminded me of why I hated it. The system is designed to box us in, and the majority of us cannot fit inside the slightly bigger box that people are advocating for when they talk about how we need a slower, incrementalist approach. Is it more efficient to leave behind non-binary people to secure baseline trans acceptance? I don't really think so, and the fact that the Democratic Party's fight for trans rights could even slide that way troubled me. So I got to work, started planning out how to advocate for a better movement, and I wrote this first draft of the video to process my feelings. Yeah, it's been nearly a year since I started working on it. Really, the whole point of making this video has just been for me to every few months write what feels like a diary entry, really reflecting on 2021 to now. You see, this year marks 5 years since I came out, it's been over a year since I made a video, and my channel turned 10 last year. In the interim between videos, I put myself to work, getting involved with political activism and doing academic-related queer work. I've been trying to position myself so I can focus on education for things like queer history, and also doing activism to help make the change I want to see in the world. 5 years ago, I wanted to be invisible. But now I realize that being passive is an affordance that I don't get. So I want to be as visible as I can make myself. I've got to keep going, keep working towards a better future. That means getting up and doing the hard part. I spent more time immersed in my community, and so over time the internet has become less important to me. The goal is for other people to have the level of community I have. It doesn't make the internet feel less important and it's still a vital tool for the future, but I've learned to lessen its impact on me. Where does that leave this channel then? Well, it's time to let go. It doesn't mean I'm done making videos, but I'm freeing myself from the expectations that I put on myself. I spent years of my life trying to get better at making YouTube videos, but I don't even really want YouTube as a career. It's meant to be an outlet for me to write stuff and have fun with it, and so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep exploring ideas like this video when I feel like it. In a way, making KimBee videos was like a magical girl transformation for me. I started out unconfident, lonely, and had a lot to learn about myself. Making videos empowered me in a way that I didn't think it ever would. It felt like putting on a new version of myself and gaining the power to speak. Eventually though, I stopped needing this channel. I spent the last year working on local work that I'm really proud of, and I'm hoping to get a PhD one day. Maybe next time I report back here, it'll be in another year where I'm hopefully in the middle of starting a PhD program. Or maybe I'm gone for good. Or you'll find me uploading next week. I don't think any of it matters anymore, because I'm happy with what I've made. There's a much longer, more complex version of this video. Maybe I'll throw it on my Substack, but I realize this video doesn't need to be complex. The point of this video is that if we're going to grow, it's not going to come from social media. The 2010s were a time of complacency, and I want to look back and have the 2020s be the same. I'm kind of just a very niche girl on the internet, and I don't think this video is going to radicalize anyone. Ultimately, I've always made videos for two people, myself and my friends. A few years back, a lot of us were making YouTube videos together, but I watched all of us going to local activists and artists. There was a time where I was looking forward to reviewing Mega Man 6 with my friend, but now we're doing stuff in our community, or the future, so let's make it a good one. It's all about growing into our adult selves and making something out of it. I wrote this one because people have asked me about more KimBees. I want to lay out what I've learned over the last few years. I can't always go out and explain to every person I know the crazy stuff that I've learned, so a new KimBee just felt like the right way to do it. In case this is the last video though, I do actually want to take the time to thank a few people who really helped out this channel. My biggest shout out goes to my friend Ro, because he's been here since practically the start of me writing videos. There's people that came before, and many that come after, but we met in fall 2019 back when we were putting out straight garbage. Back in 2020, I remember constantly trying to one-up each other, and after each video, we discussed how we improved. I think back to writing Mega Man 6 and how crazy it all felt at the time. I was nervous to be writing videos with someone else, and I tried giving it my all. The end result wasn't anything crazy, but for two high schoolers who I just met online a few months ago, it's pretty cool. Now it's the longest running friendship I have, and while we didn't ever get around to making our podcast, I think things have turned out alright. He makes his own great videos, and also does a fantastic job with all my thumbnails and the channel's branding. Significantly less people would watch my videos if not for the fact that he makes the thumbnails actually appealing to look at. I also really want to thank my friend Jen, because I've sent her so many random snippets of this video script, and finally it materialized into something released into the world. She's also one of the people that back in 2021 inspired me to try being a better writer and taking my time with each one. One of the other biggest shoutouts goes to my friend Ace, because a couple years ago, for my birthday, they drew the version of the Kim Sona that ended up becoming the channel's icon for a while, and also wanted to define my real life fashion a little bit. Finally, I want to thank my brother Benson. They've been one of the other main driving forces behind this channel, alongside helping me film all the live action gags over the years. I'm sad that I'm unfortunately on a different continent right now, because it means that I didn't get to film a last funeral gag. With that out of the way, I'm free to quit YouTube now. I added this segment last second because if this is the last KimBee, I'd be annoyed to have never done a thank you because it's been a few years at this point, so I get to be a little sentimental. So what did I learn from all of this? Not just like this video, but the last 10 years. I wanted to move on from what internet queer discourse did to me, but I see so many people well informed with shame from it. If we're going to just establish a new way to express ourselves, then what's the point? We need to be willing to call out concerning patterns in queer discourse. There's a world's difference between picking each other apart and the fact that issues such as racism in white queer spaces go under discussed, especially because people often try to push it aside by saying that we need to focus on our rights now and the rest can come later. Except no, issues like that are actually pressing and need to be dealt with now. We need to be willing to call ourselves out for bad behavior because otherwise it's going to get ingrained in our foundation. Self-critique is how we grow, and writing this video allowed me to challenge myself. I'm not saying anything revolutionary with this one, more so putting to bed my entire channel and making peace with most of what has annoyed me over the past year. It's one thing to experience all these emotions, and another to have to explain them out. So with all that over with, I can finally look ahead. The future is queer, and not in the sense that there's going to be more queer people. I mean, Ro is straight, but he's cooking up some good stuff. It's queer because we're changing to be something better. Things feel dire right now, but every day there's people fighting for it to be better. Go out into your community, make friends, and do something, even if it's showing up to a meeting once a month. Right now, the government tries to make trans people walk around with their heads in shame, trying to get us to be anything but ourselves. Detransition Day is a thing now. Transphobia is accepted as the norm, and healthcare providers are cutting us off on government orders. But things aren't always going to be this way. So, every day, I'm holding my head high, working towards a better future. I'm excited for tomorrow, because it's a step closer to the world I want to see.
I want to continue existing in this world. My life is worth living here.
Congratulations! Congratulations! Congratulations!
Congratulations!
Congratulations.
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 Thank you all.